Hello, and welcome to Mapping the College Audition. I'm your host, Charlie Murphy, Director of MTCA. That's Musical Theater College Auditions. Check us out at mtca.com. And today we've got Aaron Todd Douglas from the University of Minnesota. I struggle throughout this interview, and I sometimes slip up in not calling it the University of Minnesota Guthrie, since for so many years we would colloquially refer to this program as the Guthrie Program, but we're going to get into those specifics in the interview itself. For our newer listeners, this is another one of our college deep dive episodes where we explore the landscape of the college theater world and try to demystify this daunting audition process one school at a time. And it's worth noting this is joining a handful of our non-musical theater programs that we've had on the pod, right? We've had some BA programs, which are not necessarily exclusively musical theater. They're maybe more theater focused. We've had a lot of programs that have musical theater, acting, and dance all represented across their various schools. But now a good handful where the focus was only BFA acting and not musical theater, like the University of Minnesota. I will say for our MT or bust listeners, this of course could be an episode that you end up skipping. Thank you for your download. If you feel 100% certain that you would never entertain a program that was only acting, that was not musical theater focused. But I will challenge you, if you're not as sure, to try to listen on. I do think musical theater majors can learn a lot in exploring the acting schools, especially since so many of the musical theater schools out there will count acting as their most important discipline of the three. And so seeing what it would be like to take that one step further and look at what acting as the sole focus could be, I think can be really interesting, in the same way that some of our musical theater majors, they might explore vocal performance or dance majors as well as a possibility. And then of course, you could, of course, explore MT BFAs or BMs that really specialize in voice. You know, they're still MT BFAs, but they're really specializing in voice, or MT BFAs where you get a separate rigorous dance minor, or some programs that'll call themselves like MTD, meaning like musical theater dance, to show that they're comprehensive with the musical theater, but the focus is really strong in dance. But the important point here, and I think a lot of our regular listeners will not be surprised to hear me talk about this, the porous membrane that exists in the professional world between acting and musical theater, is that it really is a spectrum. In the professional world, it is less about the degree name itself than about how you will exit school feeling confident and comfortable in which aspects of the performing arts. And when we're talking about musical theater, you know, at the college level, we often start off talking about those three disciplines, but then it really fractures into lots of different subdivisions of those disciplines once you're out in the real world. Like, do you specialize in classical theater like Shakespeare, which I did, right? In avant-garde contemporary theater, it's a whole different skill set. In new rock musicals, in old-timey dance-heavy musicals, in commercials, in certain aspects of TV and film, in voiceovers, or likely multiple of these lanes, but also likely not 100% of them. And I think some of our artist episodes, part of what we've been trying to do is to try to showcase some of those different lanes and combinations of lanes that you can make a career in, right? And then your ability to kind of specialize and be paid in one of those fields is way less about the name on the degree than about the skill set that you actually have. And again, that really goes for acting majors as well. You may not be a vocalist at the highest level, but you may be able to be in a Broadway musical if you bring other skill sets to bear and you have enough facility with song and movement, right? We've talked about that with a dozen of our podcast guests, some of which have Tony Awards in Broadway musicals like Gabriel Ebert, but also Bryce Pinkham, John Bellman, Dakin Matthews, Calvin Smith. These are all examples of people with BFA and MFA acting degrees, no musical theater, who've made a great living in musical theater, or at least partially musical theater, right? And of course, vice versa with our great MT majors who end up hitting it big into TV and film, right? All of which is to say, and normally I kind of save these rants for the takeaways, but I thought it's potentially helpful for you to listen to this in the intro as you decide if you're going to listen on for the next 50 minutes. All of this is really just kind of say, if you're the kind of searcher who's open to looking at a broad range of schools in your process, I think that's wonderful, right? Every year we have a lot of students who start off looking primarily at MT schools, but end up falling in love with the right BFA acting program and end up going there, even though they may have a lot of MT BFA acceptances. I just did this as a social media video where I talk through these distinctions that I'm about to go through, right? There are those people who are MT or bust, and maybe they're looking at one of the non-acting disciplines especially heavily, you know, whether that's a BM or an MTD or that kind of thing. There's MT majors who think they want MT exclusively, but are open. There are the MTs who are looking at almost all MT, but might have a few BFA actors scattering in there, right, for special programs. University of Minnesota often being one of those, like some of the other acting schools that we've already had on the pod. And then you can keep moving down the line of the spectrum. I'm describing a spectrum on the far left end, but if you keep moving down that line, we have students who are really looking at half and half, some who are looking at mostly BFA acting, but will then still sing at schools that let you audition for both MT and acting in one audition or with one application, which a lot of the schools are out there. And then there are some, of course, on the far end of the spectrum who are not interested in MT at all and are only looking at acting programs. So wherever you fall on that spectrum is totally fine. And I'm not here to talk you into moving in any one direction or the other in terms of where you want to be on that spectrum, right? Including if you are on that far left end and you're the only MT or bust category and you're about to turn off this podcast. But I just think it's worth noticing that in 6 out of those 7 categories, 5 out of those 6 categories, whatever it was, many of which we're describing primarily musical theater majors, the idea of exploring a program like this would totally make sense for like 90% of you, right? Even if this school doesn't ultimately end up on your list, just in the way that you approach it, I think it can be helpful for you. So, to that end, I hope you will listen on. And for those who thought, well, we got this long takeaway intro, maybe we're going to do an entire intro without any commercial for MTCA. Fear not, here it comes. Just heads up to our current juniors and younger students. If you're listening now, this next month, as you look at coming into March, it will be a last chance for a lot of expiring discounts, right? You're going to see all this information in your email if you're an MTCAer, but it will be the last chance to get your mock audition at the lowest price available, your last chance to purchase the summer masterclass week at the lowest price available. Both of those have early bird discounts that are expiring in the next few weeks. And then as of April 1st, it's your last chance to get this round of the All Access Pass, which includes all MTCA events, including our spring faculty masterclasses, but then everything, of course, as well, summer, a mock, all those things, right? We'll open up that Access Pass again after the spring, right? And it won't include spring at that point, but this is your last chance to get all of the MTCA events and to get them at the best price. So think about your year, map it out, decide if it's something you want to commit to now in terms of looking at the events and how you want to participate. For our seniors, nothing commercial on your end at the moment, but I do just want to say, keep on keeping on. It is still February. I record this on February 25th. It is still so early in the process for you. I know it feels like everyone has lots of results and you're going to all feel the pressure to kind of rush your process to the conclusion of where it might end up while you still have incomplete information. And I'm going to tell you, please resist that urge until you have all of your information. Tons of results are still coming in. March is the single biggest month for results. They will keep coming in, right? Keep doing your research on what you know, keep in communication with the schools that are in communication with you, and then try to have some patience for the process. You have been at this for so long, and it is almost over. May 1st is right around the corner, right? But try to keep trusting the process and finish strong. Don't let the fact that one of your friends heard early and they rushed to commit make you rush your process when you haven't heard all your results or heard all of your money results yet, right? You have worked too hard at this for too long to shortchange your process now. And as you know, for our MTCAers, if you're an MTCA listener out there, we do offer those complimentary end of year consultations with Leo, where he's going to talk you through all of these questions directly, right? Those are really helpful, I think, in the stress of all this. Even for those students who have a really good idea of what decision they want to make, those sessions are still really helpful because they can prompt ideas you might not have thought of. They can prompt strategies for negotiation and a lot of helpful stuff. But mostly the reason I'm saying this now on this podcast is just to say my heart goes out to you. I hope you have some good Netflix out there for the next couple weeks and while you're receiving this results. And please, patience, patience, patience. All right. That was a really long intro. Basically, there's like 2 intros and 2 takeaways mixed in one. But I hope you enjoyed this interview with Aaron Todd Douglas from the University of Minnesota. Well, we are so excited to be joined by Aaron Todd Douglas from the University of Minnesota. Aaron himself went to Eastern Michigan and has an MFA from Illinois Urbana-Champaign. He's acted and directed at the Goodman, Victory Gardens, Chicago Shakespeare, Steppenwolf, many amazing places. Previously spent time as acting faculty at Northwestern University, Loyola University, and is now the director of the University of Minnesota BFA acting program, which is located in the Twin Cities of Minnesota. They take classes of about 15 to 20. We would talk about specific class sizes that you do, offer a BFA in acting and a BA in theater arts. Aaron, welcome on the show. How are you feeling today?
I'm feeling great. Thank you, Charlie. That was quite a mouthful.
Well, I try to give myself a challenge to start off, to sort of humble myself so the professors have to do the same. Is there anything of that mouthful? Is anything I missed in terms of like your previously on, in terms of your background? We're going to dive into the school, but anything you want to talk about in terms of your journey to the school, in terms of what people should know about you?
Sure, sure. I always, I still think of myself as an actor. That was my first orientation to the business and my
Yep.
first passion and love, and thought that I would never do anything else. But after grad school, a bunch of folks that went to school with, we converged on Chicago and started Congo Square Theater Company, which is
Yep.
still operating today. Um, and so, went on from acting and was also producing at the time, and eventually
Yep.
to pay bills, I wanted to get out of the restaurants, so I got a job at Loyola, and that eventually became a full-time situation, and teaching and acting and producing all at the same time.
Yep, I love it, and we'll maybe talk about this a little bit when we get into the training. But it looks like at Congo and maybe previously some multi-hyphenate stuff too that we didn't hit in the bio of you were. It looks like there's a playwriting in there. You were an associate artistic director, some different kind of stuff that you were playing with in terms of your multi-hyphenate artistry.
Absolutely. And the playwriting, that was the last and the one that makes me the least comfortable. Uh,
Mm-hmm. Got to
but
stretch
it's
ourselves.
the same sort of thing when you get to a certain point. It's like I'm not as satisfied as I want to be in these rehearsal processes. So
Yep.
this director, I think I could do better. So
Yep.
put up or shut up. So I decided I was going to put up, and that's sort of, well, I just saw an opportunity with playwriting. I was working with an organization that was providing teaching artistry for
Mm-hmm.
young teenagers in and outside of temporary Cook County juvenile detention all around the city.
Uh-huh.
And I noticed that there's just no artistic programming for teenagers. Like nobody
Yep.
writes plays for teenagers. So that was like
Uh-huh.
I decided to answer that call, and that's how I got started.
That's so
Started writing.
cool. I like that the impetus to sort of expand your artistry was a competitive one. Like put up or shut up. Like if I can do better, I'm going to show it to it. It's very
Yeah,
interesting. I like that.
I think
Uh,
that's because I grew up playing sports, and when
mm-hmm.
that door finally closed, I was like, it's time to move into a different phase of life, and but you never lose that competitive spirit. Yeah, and
Totally.
I think
Totally.
there's nothing better to keep you motivated than a little healthy competition.
I love it. All right. Well, let's get a little bit into University of Minnesota. So I just want to talk, in brief, and you've taught at a couple different universities, but just some from your experience of a Minnesota student, what maybe distinguishes them from other universities, but also just a kind of what is the makeup of a University of Minnesota student, in your time there?
Interesting. Yeah. Our students, they tend to be one, we're a public university, so they tend to be on the blue collar side, but I
Mm.
think we straddle both we straddle a lot of socioeconomic statuses. But our students tend to be really smart. It's not easy to get into the University of Minnesota.
Yep.
It's not easy to state. So they're a well-rounded. We really want well-rounded student actors. We're not an actor factory. It's a liberal arts program. I mean,
Yep.
I like to joke that we're kind of a conservatory in liberal arts clothing,
Yep.
um, because it's an intensive program, intensive training. But still, we stress very much. Go to your other classes, be a well-rounded human being, and that just increases your artistry. That's
Yep.
the possibility there.
Can we talk about that? So I want to get into the specifics of the acting curriculum, but sort of before we dive into the acting part of it, what are we talking about in terms of like percentage wise? Like how many of my classes am I taking that are going to be conservatory style acting classes, and how many are outside of in the other university parts in terms of liberal arts? Like what is there a percentage, or how do you weigh that balance?
Okay. Well, students tend to take their gen eds in the mornings, and then they study with us in the afternoons. It's pretty basic along those lines.
Yeah.
It's still the majority of the classes. There's still a slight majority that are in the gen eds,
Uh-huh.
which is good. But we have them for quite a bit of time in the afternoons, and we also have them in the evenings when they're in rehearsal for shows. So
Yep.
it's pretty well balanced. We want them in the first year to really embrace university life. They're coming out
Yep.
of a whole range of backgrounds, but we start them off all at square one together. And it's like, if you want to do that, go and rush a fraternity or sorority, go do that in the first year. If if you want to go see some football or volleyball or whatever sports may have, do all that in the first year while we're building a solid acting foundation.
Uh-huh.
And then it just tends to get more and more intense progressively every year after that.
And are you counting in the gen eds? Are you counting like history of theater kind of stuff? Or is that really mostly, hey, I'm taking biology. I'm taking really non-theater classes?
Yeah. The gen eds are non-theater classes, the liberal arts classes. All the theater classes are pretty much in there, either in the major or electives.
Yep.
You have to take a couple of history classes, but if you wanted more, then that would fall as an elective. A lot of our students, they want to be slash artists as well. So,
Yep.
we work pretty hard to make directing classes available for them, playwriting
Yep.
class available for them, to make sure that the timing works out.
Yep. And so then I imagine this answers the question of how possible is it to do a minor or potentially a double major? How many of your students choose to do really a whole other academic side of things as well?
Nearly all of them.
Yeah. Very
Yeah.
cool.
I mean,
Okay.
we
So
have
yeah.
a couple majors, and they always ask, but the answer is that some majors align more easily with this major.
Sure.
So if you're doing double
Schedule
major,
wise.
and that's based
Yep.
on schedule wise. Exactly
Yep.
that. Yeah.
Totally makes sense. All right, so let's zero in on the acting curriculum then. So I'd love to just hear in general, sort of what is the 4 years of the acting progression? So, if I start off, I'm truly a novice. Hopefully I'm talented. All the things you've seen that in
Right.
the audition. We'll talk about that. But then what are you going to take me through progression wise from freshman through senior year?
Sure. First year, it's all about learning the tools to analyze a script, learning imagery, learning how to move. Like we start off with African dance, because that's a great way to get students out of their heads and into their bodies.
Mm-hmm.
We don't really start right away giving students dialogue and roles in that way.
Mm-hmm.
Young people tend to think that acting is talking, but it's really not. You need to learn how to behave. You need
Right.
to learn how to move, how to be in your body, how to handle imagery. So we don't really work with dialogue. We work with poetry, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And meanwhile, students are proctoring in the evenings. They're proctoring the shows for the upper classes. So they're
Yep.
learning how we produce, how we make. And then at the end of that first year, they perform. It's basically a showcase. We call it Fresh Scenes,
Yep.
and it's where everybody gets some really meaty scene work, and it's
Yep.
usually a tremendous showing, because it's been building up all year, and they're just ready to blow and show everybody what
Mm-hmm.
they can do. You know,
Yep.
and
And
then
then how does that continue? Yeah, into the sophomore, junior year.
sure, and in second year, we dive into rhetorical devices in that first semester, for Shakespeare, because then they perform Shakespeare in the spring.
Yep.
And fall semester, they're performing contemporary scripts.
Yep.
That's entree into the performance part of it. Meanwhile, they're studying Meisner and Uta Hagen, all the systems. We don't subscribe to any particular one system.
Yep.
We operate in more of a toolbox approach, or a golf bag, whatever metaphor you want,
Yep.
so that students are exposed to a lot of different approaches. And then they, throughout the course of their trajectory, they tend to put together, we encourage them to put together their own process that they can
Yep.
draw from. Yeah.
Great. And I want to talk a little bit, maybe later, I want to talk a little bit more about sort of the exit into the business. So maybe we'll pause on that. But I'd love to just kind of talk about how you focus on different mediums or different media, I guess technically is that word, but meaning like from the Shakespeare to TV and film to commercials, voiceovers, and all the different sort of aspects of the business. How are you kind of training actors differently for those different media?
Sure. Well, let me circle back, and I think I can capture that one. In the third year, they spend the entire fall semester in London, and we have a partnership with the Royal Shakespeare Company, and they study with them in London, because they have headquarters and they have a lot of operatives in London, as
Yep.
well as in Stratford upon Avon. And we also work with this amazing theater company called Synergy, where uh, they work with incarcerated and formerly incarcerated artists, and they get a keen insight into an actual rehabilitation process. We don't really
Mm-hmm.
rehabilitate people in our penal system, more than just kind of, we focus on the penal part, but
Mm-hmm.
over there, it's a great opportunity for them, and they're creating new work as well, which is a huge part of what we do.
Mm-hmm.
And then when they come back, then that signals sort of I guess it's a descent. It all starts to move a lot faster in the second part of that third year. They have this epic project, which can be a Greek, but typically it's heightened text,
Yep.
heightened emotion, a lot of ensemble work, a lot of choral work, a lot of movement work. Um, and then they get into in the senior year, it's realism for the first semester, a lot of Chekhov, Shaw, Ibsen, all that kind of good stuff.
Hmm.
And we do this somewhat large main stage with all the bells and whistles. In the past, we have performed that a number of times at the Guthrie. This year, we're doing it at Park Square Theater in
Yep.
downtown St. Paul, and that's usually a culmination of all kinds of things. But also in the spring, the early part of that senior year, they do their senior capstone project, which is called
Yep.
Free Play, where students are encouraged to write, act, direct. Sometimes they'll decide that their project is going to be a full out concert or a cabaret, with
Hmm.
bands, whole nine yards. So it's all over the place. Sometimes they do films. I mean, it's really beautiful and a lot of fun because we really do encourage our student actors to be theater artists all the way around, whether they use this degree and act, every year for the next 20 years or they never act again.
Yep.
Whatever they do next will be because of this degree, certainly not in spite of it.
Yep. Would you say, is it fair to say that, in general, the degree is a bit more focused on classical acting in general than some other BFA acting programs? I know you don't know the whole country's BFA acting programs,
Sure.
but it does seem like from the outside, I think that's certainly our students' perception is that one of the reasons you might say, I'm going to University of Minnesota is I really love classical acting, whether that's about the time in London, but also I'm really going to get that solid foundation. Is that something that you guys feel like, yeah, we wear that label?
Absolutely. I mean, it's something that people know us for. They consider it a strength, so we're not gonna run from it. I think nowadays it's become more and more incumbent upon us to, in a sense, address the branding of it.
Hmm.
We don't really like to use the C word, the classical word,
Sure.
because it tends to be, somewhat patriarchal and white supremacist, that kind of thing. But
Hmm.
we kind of substitute phrases like heightened text, which is really what it's about, you
Yep.
know. And we also work closely with the Playwright Center, one of the preeminent new play development labs in the country, so students have a firm leg, one foot in enduring text, so-called classical texts, that kind
Yep.
of thing, but
Yep.
another one in the development of new works and contemporary works. So it's kind of a well-balanced approach. And we also have developed our newest faculty member, who's now in his second year, a gentleman by the name of Joe Cranky, is one of the country's foremost experts, teachers, and practitioners of the Alexander technique,
Yep.
and formerly of Commedia dell'arte. He's got tons of movement skills that have really leveled us up so that we're not so heavy in enduring classical heightened text works. We also
Yep.
have modern works, and we also have a strong movement component now that really feels like we're more balanced than the program's ever been.
Yep. And if I was an actor and if imagine many young actors feel like I kind of want to do everything, what would be the part of me that, in terms of TV and film training, is there anything that specifically addresses, someone who might want to work in TV and film or work in, the more commercial elements?
Absolutely. It's important because we want them to make a living. And sometimes it's not always that easy to make a living solely on on on
That's a
being
lot of back-to-back Shakespeare shows if you're trying to do it that way. Yeah.
absolutely that. So yeah, we do have that. We do a number of intensives, um, which are extended workshops, long workshops where students can focus on camera. They get several swings at the plate with on-camera acting as well as self-taping. We have experts coming in to work on that.
Yep.
Improv is an important tool where we have really talented guest artists coming in and guest directors coming in. So students are we try to put them in contact with working professionals as often as possible. And myself and my faculty, we're working professionals as well, so that the
Yep.
students always know that, keep your eyes on that prize. The object is to be as employable as possible, to have as many transferable skills as possible.
Totally. What about specifically for like our musical theater students? So a lot of our students who would be looking at Guthrie, I mean, we certainly have plenty of students who are just looking at acting programs, and Guthrie would be high on their list. And then I think, oh, there I slipped up, and we're talking about the Guthrie in a second. I'm slipped up and used the old Guthrie, the
It's okay.
University of Minnesota. But a lot of our students who have in the past done that, it might be 4 or 5 of their schools, they'll add in acting schools, but for the most part are looking at musical theater programs. They're going, I
Yeah.
think I want musical theater. Maybe especially that's the kind of student who's like, I think I want an acting based musical theater program. Looking at a Carnegie Mellon,
Yes.
look at, and then they'll go, but I do think if in the right program, I could see myself at University of Minnesota or at Rutgers or at Juilliard or some of those schools that are on their list. How does the training then work for those musical theater minded students who may say, I want to focus in acting, but I don't want to never do a musical again? How does that work at your school?
A ton of our students, Charlie, are musically talented, and they come to us
Mhm.
for that very reason. Like, I know I can sing. What I really want is a strong acting foundation, so I'm covered. My bases are covered. And we do have a full year of musical theater class, and students, some who are really want to feed that part and continue to nurture it. They have private coaches set up
Yep.
um, outside the school or inside with the School of Music. So
Yep.
that is something that we do think about. But we turn out a lot of musical talent. We've got a couple of Broadway babies, in our alumni, even a Tony winner. So it's our students are really well rounded, and they kind of understand that, and it always feels
Yep.
good to convert an MT student to a straight acting student.
For sure. That feels like it's often when the conversion happens is right now going, because so many of them start doing musicals in high school. That is the most common
Yes.
thing that you do. And then you go, but what is the part of it that I love? And sometimes it's around now that you kind of discover maybe this is the leg of the stool that I really care about the most, even if I like singing and dancing as well. But so you're saying, would it be possible for those students to then take some dance classes in, at your school that are outside of the acting program, take music classes outside? Do you have that flexibility and sort of permeability to do that?
Yes, more and more. We've recently developed in the department a dance minor, and working on flexibility so students have more and more access to dance classes, because a number of them are interested in dance and do take dance within
Yep.
the department. So that
Yep.
works out for us too.
Okay, so let's address my own error, my flub, just because I'm so used to so many of my friends and colleagues went to the program when it was the University of Minnesota Guthrie program. So can we just talk about the relationship, maybe the history of the relationship with the Guthrie Theater and how that works currently?
Absolutely. It's a great the relationship is fine, and it's not a sore spot or anything like that. People still colloquially refer to us as the Guthrie program, and that's
Yep.
totally fine. And what it means is we're no longer in partnership with them, but we are in a relationship with them. We are in collaboration with them. So basically, instead of our students going there every single Monday all 4 years, they just go for one semester,
Yep.
Monday all 4 years. Um, so it works out well. They still get access to all the shows.
Yeah.
Uh, we've got a great relationship with a number of people who are on staff there. The casting director is a fan and comes to see our shows, and so the relationship really hasn't changed very much. The separation was kind of at the dean provost
Right.
artistic director level.
Logistical level, not but in terms of the what the students care about is like, do I still have the opportunity to be in those Guthrie shows? Like
Exactly.
that still is happening just the
It
same as
still
before.
happens. Our students
Yeah.
are always on stage at the
Yep.
Guthrie, and alumni. They're
Yep.
they're always working there. That really hasn't dropped off at all. Matter of fact, if anything, under the current artistic director, I've been told that he hires our students more than his predecessors.
Yep. I would love to. The one thing you didn't talk about curriculum wise, which I had on my head from friends and colleagues who have gone to the then Guthrie program, is they all sort of graduate with freakish circus skills. Is that still something that can takes that you still take a circus class with, not just tumbling, but they're doing all kinds. I mean, the different stuff that seems amazing. And I think is one of the big draws. I think sometimes people talk about that. Is that still a current class that they take?
It is. It is indeed. Yeah. And that new hire I was talking about, Joe Cranky, he's very skilled in that regard as well. Matter of fact, we've got two qualified gymnasts that are currently in the program now. One guy is a level 10 gymnast, and I'm not all hip on my gymnast, but level 10 always, it sounds really
That
impressive.
sounds
And
like a
another
high
young
number.
lady,
Yeah, sounds good.
first year, is a level 8 gymnast. So, whenever you turn around, these people are doing flips on stage, and
Uh-huh.
yeah. And our stage combat, we've got a terrific stage combat person. So our game is really tight right now in terms
Yep.
of the movement portion of it. And yes, freakish acrobatic skills sometimes.
That's sometimes, yeah. Well, I mean, you see stuff that if you want to be on Broadway, some of those stuff that, they just did Water for Elephants or those kind of things. You go, having that skill set can be really huge as like, not just to be in
Absolutely.
Cirque du Soleil, but also just to be in shows and Shakespeare shows and whatever. Often that's a cool trick to have in
You
your
got
in
some
your bag.
friends too that's got have a weird specialty in like I can play the accordion, and like a friend of mine
Totally.
plays accordion, went to Broadway for that skill. I mean, he's got other skills.
Absolutely.
One of the main skills that got him on Broadway, and now he's been on Broadway like 6 times now.
Yep, totally. Let's talk a little bit more about that senior year. You mentioned the sort of capstone project that they work on. What about sort of from senior year into the launch of the business, sort of how you're preparing your students, I guess in the 4 years, but then, how do we help with that transition into the industry itself?
Yeah, those intensive that I spoke of, sometimes it'll be like, okay, we're gonna have a resume session, where we're gonna take you to task on these bad resumes and these bad
Hmm.
headshots. We talk about it, we hold them up, and we bring in casting directors to do that. Our students, they actually are in contact with professionals pretty much all 4 years, so it's not this harsh transition where we open the car door and don't slow down and just shove them out.
Uh-huh.
They're well prepped, and the second they come back from London in the spring semester of their 3rd year, they're eligible to apply for what we call an exemption request, where if you secure an offer and a role professionally, you propose that we excuse you from classes, and if we think the opportunity is strong enough, then we will
Uh-huh.
do whatever we can to support it, with keeping in mind that graduation is our utmost goal.
Yep. And I'd love to hear kind of what that the diaspora looks like in terms of students from your school. How many stay in Minnesota for a little while? How many seem to go right to Chicago? How many go right to New York? How many go to LA? Like, what does that look like in terms of, I know you might not have exact numbers, but typically, how does that work in terms of the transition to different places in the country and different aspects of the business?
Yeah, it morphs and changes, and it's really it's kind of defied patterns since coming out of COVID, because
Hmm.
one of the things that happened is people kind of scattered to the wind. One company, they scattered to the wind, and then 2 years later, like 75% of them, like 10 or 12 of them, all decided to converge in New York. And,
Hmm.
and so the markets are different. Sometimes they go to Atlanta too. Atlanta is still now is a
Totally.
really viable market, as you know. So yeah, they do mix it up, and they move around a lot more than they used to. They don't really choose a market and plant like they did sort of
Hmm.
like in my day. But there are patterns. But I think it's also determined by the relationships they make when they are there. When we bring in the casting director from Illinois Shakespeare or American
Hmm.
Players here, and they do workshops and they audition, this kind of stuff, that kind of tends to dictate where students might land. But yeah,
Totally.
Chicago, great market. It's a great market in the Twin Cities itself,
Yep.
um, and as well New York. Less LA these days, and I'm not
Yep.
sure why exactly, but you
Yep.
don't really have to
No,
go there as much nowadays because of with online digital showcases and casting and stuff like that. You can still be seen without changing that zip
yep.
code to the West Coast.
No, I think it's a great example. I know, I mean, just sort of anecdotally, I know a lot of people who went to Minnesota, spent a year or two in Minnesota, maybe working, finishing something at the Guthrie, doing, working for the acting company, doing something or something that kind of jumped out of that their school experience, and then moved to either to Chicago or to New York. Some of them who did Minnesota for a couple of years, and then Chicago, and then New York, with all those different versions of the journey. But just sort of having that relationship with both a theater, but then also a city, I think can be really helpful early on, just to know I got some credits and I got some that you're not necessarily, some of them still made the leap immediately to New York, but just knowing that that's not the only option, that you have to go right to New York immediately.
I think you're right, and I think that will continue to happen. It's just hard for people to know if they're ready to or feel ready.
Right.
There's no knowing. It's more about what you if you feel you're ready or not. And
Totally.
sticking around a couple years, getting some credits, maybe getting the equity card or not, that certainly does embolden them to make that leap in a couple of years. That is definitely one of the patterns.
Yep. You gave me a little bit of this at the top when you're talking about the school in general, but I'd just love to hear kind of outside of the theater program, what about the University of Minnesota in general? What is that campus experience like? What are those, you mentioned frats and sports, and what are the sort of experiences of a college student outside of the theater program?
Um, It varies because of our cohort system, which they are together, all the time, and they develop these really intense friendships and relationships. So a lot of times I end up having to really encourage them. Maybe you should move across campus this year.
Hmm.
Maybe you should develop some outside interests so that all your eggs aren't in one basket, so to speak. Again,
Yep.
that's me in the well-rounded person. But I think it's a great experience for them because there's so much going on in the city. There's great music, there's a great dance culture, and there's tons of theater to see and do. So the students, they have a great experience in terms of being a major Big Ten university. So
Yep.
they have the best of that, but they also have this kind of boutique experience with we're not a huge program. So they're getting that nurturing and these really close relationships with faculty and great experiences. Again, I talked about this cohort system. We do prescriptive casting where we curate everyone's experience. There's a lot of
Hmm.
programs you go to and you you shoot your shot, you audition, and then you maybe get on stage once or twice by the time
Yep.
graduation comes around. We put our students to work every single semester. Everybody gets, at some point, a larger role, a supporting role,
Hmm.
transformational roles. So everybody gets a good experience. We invest in every single student that crosses our threshold. And I think that's kind of important. That's why we try to recruit so carefully, so
Yep.
that I mean, it's all a leap of faith, but we want students to graduate and we want them to have a well-rounded experience so they can meet the marketplace.
I love that. Let's talk a little bit about costs. So our crack research team came up with the tuition being about 35,000 per year. What does that look like in terms of, what most students could expect to pay when we talk about scholarships? And then just how do scholarships work when we're talking about something like, am I getting academic scholarships? Am I getting talent-based scholarships? Is it mostly need-based? How does that work for you guys?
Yeah, as a public school, I would say the more of the scholarship money is need based,
Hmm.
but we do definitely have merit based scholarships, and it comes in a couple different forms. There are some programmatic and department funds that I can manage and distribute, and also the college and the university, they have a much larger pot
Yep.
to draw from, and so we kind of combine those to try to make the most attractive offers as possible.
Yep.
Uh, because we do want our program. I think it's a great experience when students are studying with people from different walks of life, from different perspectives of this country and even this world. And I think that's great. We do
Yep.
have in-state reciprocity with Wisconsin and the Dakotas, and that's kind of helpful to us
Yep.
because it allows us to recruit in that way and make the dollar stretch a little bit farther.
Yep. Well, I love it. It's well said. I love to kind of now imagine that world of one of our students who, and I didn't mean to mention some of your competitor schools and not intending to omit any of them. There are probably many other ones. If they were listening, we go, hey, I should be on that list, which I'm sure you should. But let's imagine we have a student who got into 4, 5, 6 really strong BFA acting programs, and they're
Yeah.
sitting down with you and they're trying to make that decision. Maybe they're negotiating that exact scholarship, but they're sitting there and they're going, okay, so ATD, maybe they've gotten familiar enough. ATD, talk to me. Why should I choose Guthrie over, why should I choose University of Minnesota over UNCSA or over Rutgers? Or they're sitting down and they're making those kind of decisions. Why do you find that students end up choosing you, both in terms of your pitch and maybe what works? And then if you know, why do they choose somewhere else? If you hear from them, they go, oh, I loved you. This was so fun meeting you, but I decided to go to the other school because of X. Do you have a
Yeah.
sense of why those reasons are?
Yeah. I think students pick us because they get to know, obviously we encourage them to visit and to see the work. And that usually does most of the job for us. Um, to talk to people that they know who've been through or look at actors that they like that have come through the program. Those kind of things do most of the work for me. I don't like to be a salesman. I don't like to sell snake oil or anything like that.
Hmm.
It's just get to know us, understand that we mean what we say. When I say we invest in every student, that's exactly what I mean. And every student acquires a sincere skill set, and they are prepared to meet that marketplace wherever they are. We're not trying to break anybody down to build them up. We build them up to build them up. You
Yep.
know, we don't have a cookie cutter type or style. Um, we we're kind of accessible to all different types and walks of life. The people that decide not to work with us, typically it's because we can't offer them the kind of money that some of
Hmm.
the other schools can offer them. But we
Hmm.
can offer them small group training, ensemble feel, great text skills, that kind of stuff.
Somehow you avoided that whole answer without mentioning the weather. I feel like at least some students would say it's too damn cold, right?
We sell it by saying, here's what we do. We have 4 seasons, at least 4. Actually, we have more like 8 seasons, and 4 of those are winter. But
No, I know my experience. I got to visit there. One of my friends attended, so I visited forever back then, and it's my first time experiencing everything's underground. You have the ability in February to never go up above ground somehow. This is like a Minnesota specific thing. From not being from there, I'd never experienced that before.
it's kind of nice having these downtown Minneapolis. They have these hamster tunnels, that go from the
Literally
shop
hamster tunnels. Yes, that's
down to
right.
campus. There's underground tunnels. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Theoretically, it's cold, but you don't necessarily have to know it if you're inside all
that's
the
right.
time.
You don't have to go very far. Get that dorm right across the street. You're good to go.
Yeah, I love it. All right, so we'll be back in a flash. We're gonna take a quick break. We'll be back in a flash to talk a little bit more about the audition process. So stick with us. All right, we are back with Aaron Todd Douglas, colloquially ATD. We may be trying to slip that in if you hear me do that. I just love to talk in short about what makes a great audition for you. Is when you're on the audition tour, what are you looking for? Because obviously you have to make some decisions to narrow it down. It's like, what are you looking for, and what helps you kind of cull down? This might be a University of Minnesota student, and this might not be.
Yeah. I need to get a sense of who the human being is as well as the actor. I mean, I don't know about you, Charlie, but I was not fully formed when I was a 17-year-old
I
trying to
was
go.
17 was my peak, to be honest.
Ooh.
I'm just all it's all just
All
downhill for
downhill.
me in the bad way. Yeah,
So you try to really focus on potential and capacity
yeah,
rather than what's in front of you right now. Some kids, they don't have access to go to all these wonderful training cherubs and arts bridge, and they don't have the capacity for that. Talent
yep,
is distributed, but opportunity isn't necessarily well distributed in this life.
yep,
So we try to really allow for that growth, and that takes again that leap of faith, but also you do this for a while, you can get a sense of someone about who they are. I like to talk to them. I like to find out where their weirdness lies, where their
yep,
quirks are. Are they curious? Are they
yep,
intellectual? Are they hungry? Is this person fun? Do you want to spend
yep,
4 years with this person? Um, and those things mean a lot to me. One of the things I don't like about the digital audition, it's really helpful. It can be incredibly helpful. But a lot of times when students will do a slate and then edit it and then cut
yep,
away and and they're writing this thing, it's like
yep,
I need to see that transition from applicant to actor to character. I need to see that moment before. That just tells me so much. So nothing ever beats the in-person, vibe. And
yep,
I try to have the ability in person to calm them down so they can do their best work.
yep.
I want to make
Uh,
the friendliest audition room possible because I know what it's like on the other side, and there's nothing good can come from looking down your nose at somebody intimidating them.
Yep. I love that. I want to burrow down on a couple things you just said there, but let's start off burrowing down on the sort of video audition. So, in terms of how you would use a video versus then how you would use a virtual audition, and then all the different ways that we could potentially, so a live virtual audition versus a video versus all the different ways I can sort of actually audition for you in terms of on campus, other regional opportunities. So, what do the different, how does that progression look like for you if you're going to see me in different forms?
Yeah, we do. The summer before, we kind of started off by going to like International Thespian Festival, making a couple of recruitment trips just to get the ball rolling, to
Yep.
get that recruiting season started. But I don't hold people accountable to that because they're still, there's a lot of growth that happens between August or even July
Yep.
to this season. Now we're in the season. Matter of fact,
Yep.
there's a ton of growth that happens from the time that they tape there. We use accepted,
Yep.
they accepted that, and they're taping those in October.
Absolutely. We
There's a
just did a whole takeaway about this of how different you are in October versus now.
yes,
But some schools do use those videos. They may watch them again in March. And so you go, oh, that's
right.
hard. It's frustrating when you're like, I'm better than I was then. Yeah.
Yeah, and I watch them. Of course, I watch them. But when somebody walks in the room and we're doing the unifieds, that is the next step where most
Yep.
of it all gets done. We have an on-campus audition before unified seasons, like in the second week of January,
Yep.
and then we do Chicago and New York. We don't necessarily do LA anymore. Not that many
Yep.
people go out anymore. But I do make a recruitment trip in the summertime to LA. But
Mm-hmm.
when they walk in the door, that's where the real magic happens in, this time of year, going to Chicago in a couple of
Yep.
days, back from New York. And that's where that audition is going to trump anything we see on video. But
Yep.
sometimes we will refer back to that video that we all looked at and talk about this
Yep.
person. And sometimes, you need more than a single dot to plot a line. You need two. And
Yep.
that helps.
Yep, I love it. Okay, so I want to talk more about the callback audition, the live audition. But what are you looking for then in we'll call it a pre-screener, in the video audition? What are you looking for in the first video of that might say, yes, I want to see more from this student, or no, I don't necessarily want to see more from this student?
Um, Storytelling is huge for me.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell a story? You know, do you have the capacity for humor? You don't have to be downright funny.
Yep.
Helps, but are you able? Do you understand humor? Rhythm. Can you set up a joke? Can you deliver a punchline? Can you take it down? And also rhythm in terms of phrasing for a monologue. I want to see if you understand that monologues need to be active. They can't be this passive,
Yep.
reflective storytelling thing. They need to be somebody on a journey pursuing a want. But again, that last part, pursuing a want, that's sometimes you don't have
Right.
students
They
that
may have been
they
trained to
don't
do
have
that.
access to this. They haven't
Yep.
been trained. They don't know this kind of stuff. So you have to try to pull things out of them. I like to give an adjustment in the room to see how they respond. Those are the things I look at. Can they look me in the eye? Can they articulate what it is they love about this business? If I ask them a question about their character, even if they get the answer wrong, can
Yep.
they articulate something clearly?
Yep. It's also well said. And I want to now. Okay, this one I want to burrow down because I love the word capacity. I think it's such a great word. Especially because I think a lot of our students who may have started in the musical theater, we have an understanding of like talent from like what a great singing voice is, and you can kick your face dancing. We know what that is, right? But so if I'm looking for capacity, if I'm looking for potential in an acting talent, and what we're going to call acting talent, I think it is a bit more ineffable. How are you sniffing for that capacity in the Shakespearean sense? How are we sounding out the depths, right? What are you doing? And then what are you looking for to resonate back to you when you're going, this person seems to have a lot of capacity for growth, even though they might not be as far along. This person might be farther along, but I'm not necessarily sensing a capacity for growth. What does that mean for you as you're sort of looking for that capacity?
Mm. I think there's an empathy you look for.
Mm-hmm.
Is this person, do they have the capacity to put themselves in another human being's shoes and reflect their journey, their challenges, their obstacles, their pain?
Yep.
Um, can they deliver an image
Yep.
from words to deed? Can they put an image in their mind? Can they transport themselves somewhere or transport me somewhere? That'd be even better if they could do
Yep.
that. Do A lot of times it goes back to a spark.
Yep.
Are they a go-getter? Are they hungry? Are they fun? Do they love language? Do they want to solve problems?
Yep.
Because at the heart of what we do is a problem solver.
Yep.
I want somebody to who's just as obnoxious as I am, downright annoying as I am
Yep.
about. I don't have to be right all the time, but I do want the information. I do want to be close to right. I love being right,
Yep.
but I won't live or die if I'm wrong. But if I don't know something, I'll look it up. Would this person look up the answer if they don't know something, or will they
Yep.
just?
Yep. And zeroing in on that redirect or the adjustment that you might give them, is there, what are you looking for? What are you testing for as you throw them an adjustment? Is there something beyond just the willingness to take the adjustment and be flexible? Is there something that you might go, you could think a lot of our students now when they're getting adjustments are going, what did they want from me? Why did they do that? Was it mean it wasn't good? Like, what are you looking for in that sounding out when you give an adjustment? What are you hoping to sort of learn?
Listening? Are they hearing me? Can they tune out the noise, all
Mm-hmm.
the distractions of this artificial construct of an audition process? Can they tune that out? Are they listening to me, and can they process it? Are they wooden? Is it practice to the point where nothing will ever change no matter what I say or do in this
Yep.
room right now?
Yep.
What am I looking for to give an adjustment? Um, I think that's it. I think those
Yeah.
are the main things.
And obviously, I imagine it varies
Present,
from
are they
adjustment to adjustment.
present
Yeah.
in the room? Are they
Yeah.
present right here and now? And can they, change? Yeah, I think that's covered, I
Yep.
guess. Yeah.
Love it. Coming back a little to those MT focused students, so when you meet an MT focused student, you said you like making that conversion sometimes, and you know that they'll say, "Yes, I'm a singer. You're one of 3 acting schools that I'm auditioning for, but I really love singing." Is there something that you're looking for in that student in conversation in terms of like, are you sniffing for a certain kind of seriousness of purpose, or are you thinking, will this student ever potentially attend me, or am I sort of a backup? Like, is there any sort of thing that you're looking for from a more musical theater focused student that's different than you might be from someone who says, I know I'm interested in only acting schools?
Just the openness. Are you entertaining this, or are you just kind of doing this because your mom wanted you to, or
Mm-hmm.
somebody told you ought to? If you're genuinely interested in this, then I'll go with you. I'll take it on face value. Um, I don't prejudge MT actors, or any actors for that matter. I want us both to start with square one, because you got to want to be here as much as we want you to be here.
Yep.
There's no
Yep.
for that. It cannot be an uneven partnership in that way.
Yep, well said. One thing I forgot to ask around the pre-screen was, approximately what percentage of students are getting a callback? So in terms of when you first see those videos, and how many students are being invited to then do an audition from that?
Hmm.
Of course, only share if you're willing to. You don't have to if you don't
No,
want
no,
to
no.
share the
I don't
secret
mind at
sauce.
all. No, I appreciate that, but I don't mind. Um, Honestly, Charlie, we don't we don't really discourage anybody from attending a live audition.
Uh-huh.
We look at the digital accepted audition, and then we score, the thumbs up, thumbs down, or whatever. And if they're interested in us, we will absolutely give them the chance to audition in person, because I think that that's important. Everybody deserves a couple swings at the plate.
That's really cool. So it's just a piece of information along the road for you. It's not going to preclude them from the ability to have a live audition. It was just, if anything, you're going to see this, and then maybe you see growth of if they're going to come
Absolutely.
back and they say, I'm a better actor. That's really cool.
I would say of the people we initially see in the digital, um, we're probably highly interested in, maybe half.
Uh-huh. I
That a
love it.
fair get
T-
go to the crux
Totally
of
fair. Yeah.
what's wrong with the question.
And then, if you had to estimate, like, how much then in terms of those students, I don't need a percentage, I guess, of the students, but how much of, in terms of your process, is then related to the academics versus the artistic? So how does it basically work in terms of, if you're interested in a student artistically, how does that then work with the Office of Admissions in terms of how they are admitted to the university, and if there's any dialogue back and forth that way?
Yeah, there's a lot of dialogue, honestly. Um, they ask when they're about to disqualify somebody, they ask if we're considering them.
Uh-huh.
If we're considering them, they go, okay. And then there's a couple of steps. Sometimes it's like, well, we need to see what this last semester grades are going to look like.
Uh-huh.
I can argue on their behalf, which I often do, but you can't argue for 20 people. You can only argue
Right.
for 3 or 4 in
Yeah.
order to make a good case for that. Um,
And is there a certain level below which you can't argue, of a certain GPA where you go, this is not going to work. This is just too low?
yeah, strangely enough, the mean GPA for the College of Arts and Science is actually higher than it is for this College of Education.
Come on, University of Minnesota. What's going on?
So I think it's a little bit weird, but
Yep.
yeah, if you're under 3.0 in high school, it's gonna be an uphill climb to get
Yep.
past admissions.
Yep. And then, is there any part of the academic application that you interact with? So obviously you're having that conversation with admissions, but are you reading the essays? Are you looking at the grades? Are you looking at SAT scores or ACT scores? Are you looking at letters of recommendation? Any of that kind of stuff that you're going to be interacting with?
The GPA and the grades, that's what we get, and if it gets down to the latter stages, where we really want somebody, and then the admissions office will be a little bit more forthcoming with what are the obstacles in the way of admitting the student.
Yep. And then I'd love to hear sort of, you mentioned the humanness and kind of what you're looking for as a human being as they're doing the audition. Apart from the sort of things that you might look for in those artists generally, apart from the talent, I'd just love to hear, like, what else are you thinking about as you're filling out a class in terms of, are you conscious of gender balance and height balance and race balance and geographical balance and different things? How does that work as you're kind of putting together a cohort of people, especially when you talk about initial offers and then potentially waitlist movement or stuff like that? How are you sort of thinking about the class that you're putting together?
Yeah, we try to have as close to parity in terms of male identifying and female identifying students. Um, Again, that does get a little bit tricky nowadays when gender is more of a construct,
For sure.
and we're wide open to that. There's a number of students who they come in having a preference to play only male characters, and then they go, well, I'd be open to playing either, and then they
Hmm.
go, in another year, I'm only playing female characters now, and that hasn't, honestly, it has not been difficult
Yep.
to work with at all. It's actually kind of fun.
Yep.
um and that's, again, when we do heightened texts, like you got your Shakespeare and you got
Totally.
your epics, that kind of stuff. um we're doing gender bending anyway, always kind
Yep.
of,
Yep.
because it just makes things more fun. And lets us interpret things in different ways. We're not allowed to factor in, um, there are no more DEI initiatives, as you
As of
know.
a couple days ago, the government says nothing. That hey, the Tuskegee Airmen, they're out.
Right. It didn't happen. Also,
Mhm.
affirmative action was struck down a couple years ago, and we always
Yep.
get finger wagged. But
Yep.
yeah, Charlie, I do my best to recruit a company that reflects the world, not just that we have, but the world we want to see.
Yep.
And it's a challenge, especially if I don't have scholarship dollars to compete with, you know,
Yep.
Juilliards or Carnegies or whatever.
Yep. Totally makes sense. Okay. And then we mentioned a little bit about online auditions. So are you also hosting virtual callbacks as well beyond the video? Would they have the opportunity to do a virtual Zoom for you? Or is it mostly, hey, I'm going to come to one of the unifieds, come to on campus, and then there's the video component?
If they cannot make it, we want to see everyone at least once live.
Yep.
And if they can't come to on campus or one of the unifieds, then, matter of fact, tonight I'm going to see like three people in an actual what is it, real time Zoom, so
Yep.
we can have questions and have like that interview portion of it.
Yep.
But we also invite, we designate a couple of productions over the course of the semester, where we strongly encourage students to come, see the work, meet some people, tour the spaces, get to know faculty. And we stay out of it in a lot of ways. We really empower our students to speak with the candidates.
Yep.
And I want them to have the unvarnished truth, rather than talking to somebody, two, three times their age.
Yep. Well, three times. You're not three times, maybe two and a half, Aaron. I would never. You mentioned that's what, and I would love to kind of talk about. I know in the past there was an official, like, sort of mandatory callback weekend that was part of
Yeah.
the thing. Is that no longer a mandatory thing, or is that still there's still basically a
No, well,
callback weekend
we
same way?
kind of, as the world changed and evolved, it was a great thing. And
Yep.
it was kind of a signature thing for our program. But as the world kind of evolved, people getting more paranoid, liabilities and things like
Uh-huh.
that came into play. And so we've had to let that go, unfortunately. I wish we could still do it, because it was an impressive endeavor. It really
Yep.
was.
Really
And
seems like it modeled more some MFA programs. There are a lot of MFA programs would have that kind of a callback weekend or a second callback in some ways.
yeah.
And yeah, you guys were unique. You're only a handful of schools that do anything like that. Um,
Yeah. And you get new chairs and they go, you're spending how much on that?
yeah, totally. Totally. But it sounds like you still have some constructs of what maybe become visiting weekends for admitted students then,
Yes.
where you're encouraging something similar in atmosphere, some elements of that you're trying to maintain.
Yes, absolutely. That is the kind of the purpose of that, without us absorbing liability and spending more money than deans and chairs would prefer. Yeah.
All right. Well,
And it's
now,
worked out for us really well, because
yeah.
there's nothing that, I mean, the proof is in the pudding. If you come and you're like, this is not my type of work,
Yep.
fine, good. It's best we
Yep.
know that now, as opposed to, a year and a half, 2 years in, and then you're kind of trying to change course. Yeah, it's much better to know exactly what you're getting into.
I love it. Well, now that we're starting talking about liabilities and logistical things that people are falling asleep, so we're going to start moving toward wrapping up this audition. I mean, this interview. Is there anything else that you wanted to hit in terms of the either the school itself or the admissions process that we didn't get to?
I could add that the springs and the summers here are awesome.
Oh, yeah,
And
you
it
told us about the 4 negative seasons. Give us the 4 good
Right,
seasons.
right. It's beautiful. It really is beautiful. And it really is a cosmopolitan city. I mean, my undergrad was in Ypsilanti, Michigan, and my grad, great school, great facilities, but it was in the middle of cornfields, in
Hmm.
downstate Illinois. But so I do really appreciate that we are in a really world renowned city with so
Yep.
much going, so much to offer.
Totally. All right. Well, I'd love to just wrap then with, a lot of our listeners are parents, parents theoretically listening for the sake of their children and then making their children. This is what I heard this weekend more than the kids would come up and say, my mom is such a big fan of your podcast. I'm like, and you're not? What are you trying to tell me? Like, you should be, this is your process. Why is mom doing all the listening?
Yeah.
But a lot of our, of course, listeners are parents who listen for their children. And I'd just love to kind of hear, if you have any advice to the parents in terms of them going through this process of just like how they can support their child, how they can help their child through this process, as they're an hour into this podcast, and it's probably not the first podcast they've heard on this subject. Just how do you advise those sort of parents in guiding their kids?
Yeah, I think, and one of the things is get that separate college email, that separate all things concerning this whole process. Do a whole
Hmm.
separate email, and then you can just shut it down and forget about it later. Um, that's the one of the things. Two is you have to empower your kids, give them the agency to lead this endeavor because it reflects poorly on them if mommy or daddy is running the show.
Hmm. Hmm.
I'm dealing with adults. I love parents. I appreciate parents. I talk to parents. I try to schmooze them up and be as friendly as possible. But the fact of the matter is, my contract, my service is due the student, not the
Yep.
parents. So you're not doing them any favors when you are doing all the difficult stuff for them, because
Yep.
that's the point of college. You're supposed to get better at difficult stuff. Stuff doesn't get easier.
Yep.
You just get better at hard stuff.
I love it. So well said. All right. Well, if students and parents, but mostly students leading this process, would like to hear more information about your school, where's the best place to them? You want to write to the website? Do you like social media? Is there any better places for them to check out more information?
Yeah, I think go to the school's website and accepted. Our stuff is pretty condensed on the accepted app, and it's in one place, and you don't have to surf around the school website. But all the stuff is there on the school website as well.
I love it. Well, Aaron, Todd, ATD, it was so great to get to chat with you. I really appreciate the time.
Thank you so much, Charlie.
Yes, yes, yes. I really hope you enjoyed that conversation. I wrote down so many takeaways from it. I'm not sure why I have so many from this one, but I'm going to try to be as succinct as possible as I run down the list, but I'm going to do a lot of them. The first one is a small one, but did you notice that Aaron referred to slash artists early in the episode? Just noting this is a different way of saying multi-hyphenate artist, right? It's actually my preferred way of saying it. I used to say it that way since I do normally say or write actor slash director slash writer or whatever, right? But I've given in to the popular vote of multi hyphenate. That's a more common way of expressing this same concept. I do think it sounds better to say multi hyphenate rather than saying many slashes, right? But I just wanted to give some love for that way of saying it too, because I do think that is like, that's how I thought of saying it. And a lot of people do still say that, or especially some older generations of people will say that. I can't believe I'm an older generation of people. The second is another smaller one, but did you notice that HED quickly said, even a Tony winner, right? So in this, I'm guessing he's referring to Santino Fontana, who was in the first class of the Guthrie program. I don't know why I said Santino's name but that weirdly, but we'll move on from it, right? But for those you know Santino's career, he went on to have a great career in musicals, including being like Prince Hans in the movie Frozen, and then starring opposite my wife at Carnegie Hall. I mean, you can look up the rest of his amazing credits, but those are the most ones that are relevant to my life with a 3-year-old who watches Frozen all the time. But I wrote this down as a takeaway because I think it is funny the way that these schools are sometimes reticent about name dropping. Like they feel it will be uncouth to brag about specific successful alumni, even though I actually think it would be really interesting to all of you to know if you don't happen to know who went to these schools, right? It's funny with this because with these in-person specifics or in person on these interviews, live specifics, I always really love it. But on a website, I actually tend to not love like a notable alumni list because I think they can be really deceptive at different schools. If you just go to those quick Google of notable alumni, right? Sometimes those are people who are directly related to a BFA program and should totally count like Santino, right? And sometimes they attend for one semester, or sometimes they did the summer program, or they were entirely a different major at the school, some of these people that they're going to list, right? So not to go too deep into the minutia there, but I do think when you just glance through a list, it can be a bit deceptive. It also, this is what gets into the top programs when we talk about the numbers, which schools have tons of numbers of alumni. And so when you look at that, it can be a little confusing. But I do think it's generally helpful to hear and know when there are these kind of alumni who put schools on the map, right? And I think Santino is kind of illustrative in this case because he was in the inaugural class of the University of Minnesota. So it also gives you kind of a sense of how new the program is when you know, hey, this is someone in their inaugural class, right? In the same way that we're about to have Oklahoma City on the pod in a few weeks, and Christian Chenoweth really was like a breakthrough name to put that school on the map in a different way. Though in this case, it wasn't their inaugural class, but I keep saying inaugural weirdly, inaugural, right? But I do think those alumni names, just having a sense of like, oh, they went there and they went there, they can be helpful, even though I would always be careful in kind of how deceptive they can be when you're just looking at a website. You know, if you Google like NYU alumni, it's like almost what does that mean in terms of all the different schools, the MFA, the BFA? It can be a little bit confusing when you're looking at those lists, but in some cases, I think helpful to have a sense of alumni that went there. Okay, sticking with our quick hitters, I really love that Aaron revealed that they are having a live online kind of like sneak in day for 3 people tonight as he recorded it, right? I always say with those things, it can never hurt to ask. Many schools will make something like this happen, even if it's not a day specifically listed on the website. And honestly, the same can be true for live auditions. Though in that case, it tends to be more common at less competitive schools and more difficult at more competitive schools. That this idea of could you sneak in an audition as part of a visit on a day that they're not normally holding auditions, that's not as common with live auditions, but it can happen, especially at schools that aren't as competitive, right? And in cases like this, where online is the only option for you, you know, what's the worst that a school can say? If they say, no, please send in a video, well, that's exactly where you were before you asked, right? Always better if you can to get a live audition of some kind, whether that's an online live audition or an in-person audition or a unified audition, et cetera. If you can, that's always preferred to a video audition, and always better just kind of across the board with these things. If there's something that you can't make work, ask. What's the worst that could happen if you ask? So clearly 3 people asked and they made it work on that night, even though that wasn't an official online audition day for them. Okay, another quick hitter, which I think was beautifully timed, is that I loved Aaron giving the advice of having a separate college email. You know, we don't get a lot into like very specific practical advice on this podcast, partially because I know you guys are listening to this at all different points in your process on all these different things, right? But we did just do a great webinar with one of our college advisors, Amy Breslow, and this was a big piece of advice that she gave and we give every year, and that I know our families really appreciate. They often will tell us how glad they are that they did it, or for those who come late to the process and hear about other people doing it, they really wish that they followed that advice. They'll often say, oh man, I really should have done that, right? And again, just to be clear what that advice is to start some sort of college-specific email address. So I'd make like charliemurphycollege@gmail.com or whatever you want to name it, right? But it allows you to make sure that you don't miss the many emails that you're going to get in your main inbox, because you need to respond to all these college emails. It's a big way that you're going to get communicated is via email. And it also, one of the other bonuses, it allows you not to get flooded with advertisements, which you're going to get during this process from many schools where you were not particularly interested, but you signed up on Accepted. And so they're going to pay Accepted to do advertising emails. And you're going to get all these various emails and stuff from schools. But then it's a really easy opt out. Once your process is done, you just close out that email address, right? And I think maybe most importantly, we'll talk about coordination in a second here. It's most important for families when they're coordinating how they're going to help it allows the possibility of multiple people to work in one inbox without violating anyone's privacy. So let's say if dad wants to double check that an email response went out to a school, but you don't want him seeing your personal email as a student, it can be a great way to achieve that. He can say, yes, I did schedule that one, or no, can you reply to that one? I'm in school. Could you let them know that does work for me, right? That's the same way that like my personal assistant will see my work emails in my work email address, and they can work out of that inbox with me, but they're not going to see my personal email, right? It's a nice separation that I think works really well for families when they're doing that coordination. And that leads perfectly into that advice that Aaron gave, which I think is excellent and really worth echoing about making sure you're giving your child agency to lead. You know, we've talked in a number of these parent episodes about a number of different versions of this, right? All the different ways that you can help as a parent or not, depending how much you want to do. And there is no one right way to do it, right? From a lot of involvement to very little, it all can really work. But we've talked about some of the ways that really tend not to work. And that's if it ever feels like the parent is taking charge of the artistic process. That's kind of an easy one where we go, we know that feels like it's overstepping if the parent is really taking charge of the artistic process. And I think to Aaron's point, expanding a bit beyond the artistic, because that's an easy one, there's also something that can be a bit dangerous if it feels like the parent is the only informed party in the strategic and organizational buckets as well, right? Certainly, we will have parents take a significant role in those parts of the process, right? Even leading parts of it, like, am I going to lead something as specific as scheduling or doing that's jigsaw puzzle, right? But the child still needs to feel like they're ultimately informed about all the aspects and have agency, which means the ultimate final say. If they say, I don't want to do that audition, that feels like too much, they should still feel like they are ultimately in charge and not the parent doing it for them, right? You can think of it like they are still the CEO of the process, even if the parent is one step below them, the COO, whatever, and taking lead on part of the process. The CEO should still have the ultimate say and should have the vision for what this process is going to be, right? This may sometimes not be a large distinction or a large difference, but I think you can feel it. And I think the colleges can feel it if the student kind of becomes a pawn in the process where the parent is like pointing them where to go versus a student using their parent as a helpful resource, but then the student is walking to the beat of their own drum, right? I make that joke about the podcast. I made it again in this one, and it really is true because I know I have a lot of parent listeners, and I have no problem with parents who are maybe more comfortable in a long form interview compared with their kids, listening to a podcast for the sake of their kids, right? But ultimately, the kid should still be doing research on their own on schools that they will ultimately attend, or at least doing some of that research. So if a parent is saving them episodes, the student should be listening to some of those episodes, or at least clips of those episodes. I know maybe they need to use TikTok or whatever really smaller resources that their damaged attention spans can handle. Boy, do I have a note for myself as a parent to try to make sure my child can do something for longer than 60 seconds, right? But it doesn't mean that you can't be helpful. And I think you often can by listening to this podcast, and maybe you are helping them with some broader basic research before the ultimate research that they're going to really dive into. But the big point is they do have to be invested because they're the ones who are ultimately going to be in those rooms, right? And I can't tell you exactly where the line is in terms of it's going to be family by family, is like when help becomes too much help. But I do think it is often more about how engaged the student is than about the parent having to actively disengage. So often a parent will say, when am I doing too much? And often what I really see, it's when the student is doing too little. You can do a lot if the student is also doing a lot and you're really tag teaming. If you're doing a lot and the student is sort of not as active or not really sort of engaged in that way, that's where it can feel a little bit like it's a little bit dangerous in terms of the process, right? They have to be the ones who want it. They have to be the ones sort of motivated by the fire of this process, even if you're there helping them make it happen. Okay. And I'm going to leave aside, even though I could do another 5 minutes on that idea of like measuring capacity of talent as openness and empathy. I feel like that is becoming one of my favorite questions and a really difficult one to answer. So I'm going to try to ask that to like all of our faculty of like, what is acting talent? If it possibly can come up, the idea of trying to define what is talent in general in terms of what they're looking for is a version of what I'm asking for often. But what is acting talent? I feel like it is both really revealing how faculty members answer that, and I think a really difficult question to answer, right? And I do just want to underline Aaron's answer about Minnesota in having an understanding of being a school that is more steeped in what he calls enduring theater, right, as opposed to classical theater. He calls it enduring theater compared to other programs, right? That certainly has been my impression with my friends who've gone there. And our students over the years, when they've done their curricular comparisons between, let's say they have a couple great acting schools at the end of the day, that has often been the reason that they decided to opt or to not opt for the University of Minnesota. If they loved Shakespeare, if they loved Greeks, if they loved Chekhov, they were more likely to opt for Minnesota versus comparing them to a school like USC, for instance, right? That's, of course, not to say that you can't get good film training in Minnesota or that you can't get good Shakespeare at USC. Of course, you can in both places, the opposite. But when you're sitting down and making those kinds of decisions, you're often making them at the margins. And I think it is helpful to kind of tease out those reputational differences when they are clear. And I think this is one that I think is more clear. And I like that ATD sort of stood up to that, right? Okay. And my last of these 1,000 takeaways, I know this is a long one, is just to talk a little bit about that idea of prescriptive casting. We've talked about this concept on the pod before, but I don't think we've used that specific phrase, prescriptive casting. And I think it's a really interesting one to bat around, right? For our students who are exploring schools, in how can you investigate how casting works at a given school? Now, I think our students are often interested, and I'm going to say too interested at certain aspects of casting opportunities, right? I think they are too focused on whether they're able to perform as a freshman. To me, that is not always a good thing to be able to perform as a freshman. Up to you, you get to make your own decisions, but I think often our students are too focused on that. They're also often focused on what opportunities will be guaranteed to them, which I think is fair because some schools won't guarantee a certain amount of casting. But to me, there's a little bit more focus on that than I think there has to be. And I think just having this understanding of how a school will cast, so whether they're in this case will cast prescriptively, or not, is really illuminative, right? A lot of smaller BFA programs will do a version of this prescriptive casting, but not necessarily all. And what I take Aaron to mean, and I really am putting words in his mouth, but let's not talk about just Minnesota. Let's talk about schools that do this kind of thing that I'm describing, which I'm going to use that word prescriptive because you used it, right? A lot of schools, what they will do is that they will try to cast based on what you, the actor, you, the human being, needs. So they will factor in roles that you've played before at school, but that also includes work you've done in class, who you are right now and where you are in your development, and try to stretch you or challenge you or just give you roles to work on that they think will be ultimately be about your growth as an artist in whatever that can subjectively mean for the faculty at the time. So that can mean different things for different people at where they are in their process, but saying the goal of casting is to help our students improve, right? This does contrast with other schools that may cast their shows more based on who they think is best for the part, right? Even if they don't state that latter part of it of we cast based on, professionally or whatever as an explicit goal, if they haven't stated the former, if they don't say we definitely cast for what's best for you and we sometimes will cast against type, we'll cast to stretch you. If they don't say that, then there's a gravitational pull that pulls you toward casting your shows either traditionally or just in terms of what they think is going to be best for the show, not best for the student. And that's especially true if the school has a directing program or hires outside professional directors to cast their shows. That will pull strongly in that direction. Again, not that they'll necessarily cast traditionally, but they're going to cast for what they want their show to be, right? And that these people, if they're coming in as an outside director or even an MFA, those people don't necessarily have your 4-year educational journey at the forefront of their mind. They may not have any knowledge of it whatsoever. No, that doesn't mean that schools who utilize MFA directors or utilize outside professionals can't still have an element of prescription. They absolutely can. I know many schools will have a complicated casting process that involves all of these factors. They may get feedback from the outside directors, get feedback from the MFA, but then they have a faculty committee weighing in on all the different opinions to, what people have played and what's fair based on what other things have happened, right? And then those outside directors or those MFAs, they won't have complete control over casting their shows, right? But other schools just don't operate this way at all. They will say that they will cast the best person for each specific role out of their BFA MTs, their BFA actors, their BAs, regardless of what year or major you are, right? They're kind of replicating a more kind of capitalist model of going the best person for each role. And that's not to say, to be clear, that prescriptive is necessarily better than open competition. At different schools, I might feel differently, right? If you are by far the most talented person at a smaller school, you've chosen to be a big fish in a small pond, you might like the idea that you could get cast in 4 leads in your 4 years, right? That might be less equitable, but more optimal to you, right? And you might like the idea of playing roles that you know you could be cast in the outside world immediately and primarily, right? Maybe you like the idea of kind of stretching yourself in classwork, but then you get to pay closer attention to something that you would actually play in your school show. So it feels a little bit more like now I'm doing the work of what I'm going to do right when I get out of school, most likely, right? I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with that, but it is a very different philosophy than you're going to see in schools, which will cast with that growth mindset at the forefront, right? Where they're thinking about that, and that they may have the ability, especially smaller schools, will have more ability to cast parts more equitably within a smaller cohort tracking over the 4 years. It's never going to be exactly perfect. There's no way to cast it so that everybody gets completely equal stage time and completely equal size of role, but they can go, hey, we've given a little bit more of a lead to this person. Let's see if we can give this person an opportunity. I think this will be good for this person as best they possibly can. Okay, that is quite enough of takeaways for this episode. This episode was produced by Meghan Cordier and Kelly Prendergast with social clips by Jordan Rice. Please follow us at Mapping the College Audition on Instagram. Check out our videos on YouTube and Spotify and subscribe wherever you listen. And of course, head over to MTCA.com for help with your individual college prep needs. To my young artists out there mapping their journeys, please trust that you are enough for the right program exactly as you are right now. Keep striving. We'll catch you next week.